Welcome to BlockTime, a podcast by Riot Platforms, where we take a deep dive into topics related to Bitcoin, Bitcoin mining, the grid, energy, and anything else we come across along the way. Today, we do not have a guest. It's just me and producer Gabe. Gabe, how are you today?
Doing well, Pierre, in this holiday season. Thanks to all the listeners for joining us again.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving, is enjoying Hanukkah if you celebrate that, and getting ready for Christmas and New Year's. So I wanted to go through some of kind of the current events to catch us up, taking a look at, first of all, the Bitcoin price. I think this year has really been a really great year for Bitcoin. Started the year at $17,000, $18,000 per Bitcoin, and now it looks like we're going to end the year north of $40,000 per Bitcoin. So it's essentially more than doubled, which is, I think, given where we are in the cycle, I think it makes sense, right? We had a bear market with the collapse of FTX last year, and this year was really more of a recovery. Now, what I found interesting was yesterday, the Federal Reserve came out. Well, I say yesterday. By the time this episode comes out, it'll be last week. The Federal Reserve came out and said that they might be done raising interest rates, and so this pause might turn into a interest rate decrease next year. The 30-year mortgage went from 8% to below 7%. So I think monetary conditions, financial conditions are easing. I think the charitable take is that, hey, look, inflation is under control, so they're able to ease up on the brakes of raising interest rates. Perhaps the more cynical take would be that there's an election next year, so they've got to make sure that
everyone's happy.
Yeah, they don't want to cause problems. So kind of that would be the catalyst there. I think that's very positive for Bitcoin in either case, because it shows that Bitcoin's monetary policy is actually independent of politics, of anything else. It really is driven by this decentralized network. And so next year, Bitcoin's monetary policy is actually tightening in the sense that we have a halving, so that the number of Bitcoin being added to the ledger every 10 minutes is going to get cut in half. And so in that regard, I think that it puts Bitcoin in a really great competitive position. If the dollar is easing and Bitcoin is tightening, that is bullish for Bitcoin. I think that that's been a tailwind. The second big tailwind is the Bitcoin ETF. So it looks like there is still activity on issuers updating what the ETF is going to, what their proposed ETF is going to look like. And we'll see how long the SEC can actually drag its feet on approving an ETF, because it does seem like there's an appetite for litigating this if the SEC takes too long. So it does seem like that's coming to a head as well. So I think Bitcoin's exchange rate, the Bitcoin purists, and some would sometimes put me in that camp, point out that the exchange rate does not matter. 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, so you don't need to be comparing Bitcoin to the dollar. And in fact, the critics as well make this point that how can Bitcoin be money if you're always quoting its price in dollar terms? We start sounding like dollar maximalists. But the reality is that when we're talking about the price of Bitcoin's exchange rate in dollars, what we're really talking about is Bitcoin's purchasing power, right? That is, how many sandwiches can you buy with 1 Bitcoin? And it would be a little bit inconvenient to go around saying, well, Bitcoin's trading at 10,000 sandwiches today, and tomorrow it might be 12,000 sandwiches or 8,000 sandwiches. Not inconvenient because of the volatility, but just inconvenient because of the unit that we're trying to measure the purchasing power in. And the dollar actually, if you look at the definition of consumer price index inflation, CPI, that is defined as a basket of goods that you would buy at the grocery store, right? So I think every currency, every money ends up having to measure its purchasing power against something else. And it's in a way arbitrary, but it's also, hey, let's find the most convenient unit. And I think today the most convenient unit is dollars. In the future, maybe we'll measure Bitcoin's purchasing power in terms of pounds of steak. All right, ground beef, I think would be a good measuring stick.
More realistically, I was thinking like barrels of oil.
Barrels of oil, absolutely. I feel like barrels of oil is more volatile than ground beef. So you want something more stable.
Sure.
But it's also going to depend on geography, right? I think here in Texas, oil and steaks would be great measuring rods. Whereas in Canada, I don't know, hockey sticks?
Ham? I don't
ham?
know. Yeah, Canadian bacon.
Okay.
I like the way that you just said, we're having this, we're equating a Bitcoin is a Bitcoin, right? Is like you said, there's only 21 million going to be available. So why are we equating it to the dollar? And especially now after this past couple of years when the dollar has such a high inflation rate, I mean, when is it going to be that the price of the dollar changes more than we're comparing it to the Bitcoin that's more stable?
Yeah, that's a great question. If we look at the history of hyperinflations in other countries, I find it surprising how long people hang on to the old currency. That even though it's just lost 99% of its value over the past 12 months, people just have tremendous momentum in using it as a unit of account. So I think that it could, the dollar could hang on for a while longer. The other thing to consider would be that policymakers could decide that they want the dollar to be backed by Bitcoin. And so they could actually, in addition to having Fort Knox, with some gold reserves, they could also have Bitcoin reserves, and that would actually help stabilize the value of the dollar. Personally, I'm skeptical that will be the outcome, but it certainly is possible. But I would love to get to a world where we only think about sats. One Bitcoin has 100 million satoshis in it, and that we're buying our ground beef, for 10 sats, and that's just the way we think about our purchases. But it's interesting in Bitcoin mining. You could argue that it makes a lot of sense to denominate everything in Bitcoin, because when you're investing in Bitcoin mining, you could alternatively just be buying Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin ends up kind of being your benchmark against which you're looking at your performance of your mining operation. So yeah, I think that 2024, the catalysts are going to continue. We'll see the halving happen in April, and then from there, I think that typically, if we look at past cycles, now things could change, right? It's a very unpredictable world we live in, but we could, if we do or if the Bitcoin price behaves like the way it has in past cycles, where it goes up after the halving, it doesn't just go up, the day of the halving, right? Or the day after. It usually takes 12 to 18 months for the Bitcoin price to really have a run after the halving and to go parabolic. And once the Bitcoin price is going parabolic, there's no knowing where the top tick will be, and then of course the correction afterwards. So that'll be exciting to see. Every bull market has its own flavor. I think this one has a lot going for it, whereas the previous one, it was hampered by a number of things. It was hampered by FTX, but it was also hampered by an environment where the Fed was tightening and it was raising interest rates. And so here in this bull market, I think that the Fed will be loosening or at least going sideways, and that will give this bull market a very different character.
So, Pierre, does that mean we're calling this officially a bull market now? I mean, it's been like 12 months that we've been, positive, right?
Yes. So I would call this the recovery, kind of
Sure.
after the emotional breakdown of $17,000,
Yeah.
where people were really, in the dumps. But I would caution folks that, the in past cycles, in this interim period before the halving, we could see the Bitcoin price take back those gains, right? So maybe next year we'll be at 30K or even 25. So there's no sure thing in terms of I would hesitate to call it a bull market proper yet. Perhaps the what I would call the official definition of a bull market is when you exceed the previous all-time high, which was
Sure.
around $70,000 last bull market. So we're not far from that, all things considered. So another doubling, and we're at 80 grand, and we're really in the bull market.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think it's a little bit too early to call for the
The full
cycle.
bull market.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also had a question. Does it ever upset you when you're talking to the uninitiated in Bitcoin and they go, "Oh, that's still a thing"? I was sitting in the barber chair this morning, and they of course asked me what I did for work, and I explained to them that I work for Riot, and they're like, "Oh, Bitcoin is still a thing." Does it ever upset you?
Uh, I like that. It kind of goes into how early we are,
Sure.
and that you know Bitcoin is now an asset class that has a market cap of hundreds of billions of dollars. It has gone up in value tremendously, and yet we're still, I would argue, at less than 1% adoption.
Hmm.
And so when I hear the barber, I would actually be more concerned when the barber is talking about how he's loading up on Bitcoin, on Dogecoin, on SHIB. He's got a diversified crypto portfolio. He's lending it out. He's wheeling and dealing. Then I'm like, okay, we're at the top of the bull market here because my
Right.
barber should not be kind of going leverage long 100x on Bitcoin.
Yeah, they were they were making some jokes this morning, and of course the next question was, well, what about all those other coins? And it's like, which one's the best? I was like, well, obviously Bitcoin.
Yeah, those are. I think those are like challenging conversations because when people hear us, talk up Bitcoin, I think that part of their reaction is, well, you must be so heavily invested in Bitcoin that like, okay, you're just like shilling your bag.
Correct.
Uh, and so I think though that the interesting thing about the cycle is that to the first question, oh, Bitcoin's still around. Yeah, Bitcoin's still around. There's lots of other tokens and coins that are not around anymore,
Correct.
or have certainly not recovered the way Bitcoin has. And so I think that it helps differentiate Bitcoin, that it does survive through these cycles, not just in the Bitcoin price, but also kind of in the brand, and that it has that name recognition that, coin number 3000 does not have that name recognition, even though it's so illiquid that yes, its price could pump and, outperform Bitcoin over a few days. But that doesn't make for a great long-term investment strategy.
Right. When they brought up the other coin stuff and they were asking, why Bitcoin, or is Bitcoin the best coin? I was like, to me, the only reason that I would say Bitcoin is the real deal is that there are, instances and cases where around the world people are transacting Bitcoin in their day to day life where their local state currency is just beyond control and inflation, and they actually have to buy their haircuts and their sandwiches with Bitcoin.
Yeah, it has real utility.
Right. People
Um,
are actually transacting it.
and that backstops the value. I think that if Bitcoin was 100% purely speculative, and that it didn't really have any fundamental advantages over others, currencies, then I'd have concerns. I probably wouldn't be involved.
Mhm.
But honestly, I'd go stronger than that. I certainly wouldn't be involved. But having used Bitcoin and having been in the code and having evaluated it on a comparative basis with other monetary systems, it just stands out as clearly having more utility. Whether it's in the payments transactional space, Or in the savings area of, hey, you've got a hardware wallet, you've got multi-sig, you can sleep soundly at night. You're not worried about your bank failing or the currency, debasement of inflation.
That was the second part of that conversation was, SVB going down,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, if you have a cold storage wallet, that doesn't happen to you.
No, you can sleep soundly. Um, and yeah, I think that we should work on getting them set up to accept Bitcoin payments for haircuts.
I'd be paying my haircuts in Bitcoin
That-
too. That'd be fine.
that
Well,
would
then
be
again, your your philosophy is to hold, right?
Yes, and that if I was actually not a hypocrite, and if I actually did what I advised, I would only hold Bitcoin, right?
Right.
And that would mean that I'd have to spend Bitcoin because any dollars I had, I converted it into Bitcoin, and so now I have to spend those Bitcoin. We're not there yet as a society, so and this speaks to our prior guest Parker Lewis talked about kind of developing that circular economy and how you kind of have to get the business owner to be in that mindset of wanting to hold Bitcoin in order for them to say, all right, I'll accept Bitcoin in order for me to be able to spend my Bitcoin there. So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, but I think that egg is being cracked and just slowly but surely more and more business owners and are getting on board with the idea that they want an alternative to the status quo.
Yeah.
So yeah, once the barbershop is bullish on Bitcoin and they want to go long Bitcoin, then it's just easier for them to get Bitcoin for the haircut than it is to get dollars and then transfer the dollars to Coinbase and then convert the dollars into Bitcoin. It kind of cuts out those steps.
So you're saying is the catalyst for full adoption is the local barber?
I think so.
Perfect.
It's it's a central social institution. It's a clearinghouse of information in these communities. And so if we can get the barbershops on board, or we could start our own chain of barbershops, right? Bitcoin barber.
Hey, that's catchy.
Yeah. Bitcoin only. And all of our haircuts involve us putting a B on the side of your head so that people know that you're on board.
How many subscribers do we need on Apple Music or Apple Podcast for you to get a B in the side of your head?
That's
a million.
All right, I'm trying to think. What's a rational response to that? Would be around 1 billion people. If we get to 1 billion real subscribers, okay, not bots. Billion.
Give us something realistic, Pierre.
That's realistic.
1 billion.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll say, I had one experience in high school where I buzzed all my hair off. And I got ridiculed for it, mercilessly mocked, right? Because this is high school, right? And after that, I've kind of just played it pretty conservative with how I go about my haircuts. But I'm not opposed to putting a B on the side of my head. So I'll tell you what, if we get to 100,000 legit subscribers, I will put a B on the side of my head. I'll go to the barbershop, I'll pay them with Bitcoin, and we'll put a B on the side of the head.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. It's going to take a significant bull market.
But it's going to happen one day.
It's going to happen. And Gabe, we have to up the production quality.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
More CTAs, more campaigns.
Sorry for getting us off track with that.
No, that's all right. No, we're perfectly on track here. Okay, so yeah, I'm glad it's coming up at the barbershop, and the you're leading the charge on frontline adoption here.
Hey, I'm just spreading the good word.
Yep, excellent. Maybe we should record a podcast at the barbershop. I like that idea as well.
The audio quality might not be good with all the clippers going in the background. And,
yeah.
There are some non-work safe topics that go on at the barbershop, but we'll have to,
Yeah. It's it's not corporate.
No, not very corporate, but it would be fun.
Yeah. All right, let's change gears to something less fun. This on the December 11th, Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren from the great state of Massachusetts, announced that she has brought on more co-signers, co-sponsors to her new legislation about Bitcoin. And I think to get into this topic, I have to provide some background on the regulatory environment for financial services in the United States. Um, one of the biggest pieces of the regulatory environment in the United States is called the Bank Secrecy Act. Um, it as in classic government style, the substance of the Bank Secrecy Act is the opposite of the title. Okay, so it really is the Bank Surveillance Act. There's no secrecy involved, and it is about essential. And this was passed in 1970, so it's a relatively new law, right? It's not like the founding fathers came up with the Bank Secrecy Act. In fact, the founding fathers came up with the opposite of the Bank Secrecy Act, the Fourth Amendment, which says that you have to get a warrant in order to execute a search, and that you have to have probable cause. What the BSA did was remove that requirement for financial records at financial institutions, meaning that the government can get all of your information from your bank without probable cause and without a warrant. So this has led to a giant surveillance scheme that is a panopticon, right? It's keeping eyes on everybody's finances 24/7, 365. And that, they rationalize this as, oh, well, it's to catch the bad guys. But I think what's missed by that is why the founding fathers put the Fourth Amendment in the first place, which is that, yes, we want to catch the bad guys, and we also want to protect innocent people. We also want to defend the rights of the people who are civilians, who are not criminals, and who are not terrorists, which is the overwhelming, it's 99.9% of society. And so it's critical to protect their privacy for a number of different reasons. And I think that one example is that the information from the BSA then goes to the Treasury Department, and it goes into a giant database. And I would ask, from a cybersecurity perspective, what happens if that database gets hacked and everybody's finances are out there? And it's not a hypothetical. There have been leaks from that database, and the Treasury Department itself has repeatedly been compromised by cybersecurity attackers. And so it's not the case that, hey, if we collect all this information, then we'll find the bad guys. The bad guys could get their hands on all that information and use it against civilians, right? So if they know that you have all this money, now they're going to target you with all sorts of identity theft, right, which is rampant and is fueled by this regime of total surveillance. And so I think that there's a lot of different problems with the status quo. First and foremost is that it's unconstitutional. And so hopefully the Supreme Court will take this up and will undo this attack on the civil liberties of Americans. Now, unfortunately, instead of repealing this surveillance mechanism and getting this country back to its roots, Senator Warren is deciding to go in the opposite direction of expanding this and expanding it far beyond the scope it had in 1970 of really looking at banks. And now everybody has to comply with this. Now, you might look at the law she's proposing and push back and say, hey, Pierre, she's not saying everybody. She's just saying if you're running a Bitcoin node, or if you're running a Bitcoin miner, or if you're holding your own private keys, now you're subject to this draconian law. But the thing is, all three of those are entirely permissionless. And you can, for example, you could accidentally create a private key, right? If you put together 12 words, that's a private key. So you are essentially saying that any 12 words, any 24 words are now a financial institution that needs to report everything to the federal government. And if they don't, that's a felony and they'll go to prison. or if you run a Bitcoin node on your laptop at home, if you download open source software and open it up, now suddenly you are a felon. And if Senator Warren's law were to pass, and likewise, if you perform the SHA-256 function, the hash function, which is available in every programming language, and is any computer in the world can mine Bitcoin. Well, now Elizabeth Warren has concerns, and she's going to put you in jail. So this proposed legislation is really a sweeping attack on law-abiding citizens, and Elizabeth Warren is taking this angle in order to ban Bitcoin in the United States because she doesn't like Bitcoin. It's not because she's trying to catch criminals and stop terrorism. There's lots of far more effective ways of doing that than passing this law. No, it's that she wants to pass a law that is impossible to comply with so that it is an effective ban on Bitcoin in the United States. Why does Senator Warren not like Bitcoin? Why does she not like it to the point of wanting to ban it and violate everyone's civil liberties in the process? Well, it's just because she can't control it, is kind of the bottom line. And namely that she wants to be able to, and it's not just her, right? It's an ideology, unfortunately, called chartalism, which says that the only entity that has the right to have its own currency, its own money, is the government. That all currency, all money should be issued by the state. That is chartalism. And that is an ideology that goes back many decades and centuries. But and arguably millennia, right? When you look back at the mints that would mint the coins that had the emperor's face on it, governments always want to centralize that and monopolize it in order to be able to control it and in order to be able to give themselves resources beyond just what they tax, right? So if the federal budget had to be financed purely through taxation, all of your taxes would be 30% greater because that's approximately what the deficit is. And so deficit spending and inflation and debasing the currency allow the government to have more resources than it otherwise would. And that is something that Elizabeth Warren, that's near and dear to her heart and to the chartalist perspective. Furthermore, when they are looking at how to control the financial system, yes, of course, part of it is just legitimate law enforcement and going after criminals, but a lot of it is also just politicized, right? So they want to go after their political enemies. So if you disagree with, for example, in Canada, a vaccine mandate, if you believe in your right to choose what what medical procedures you have performed on your body, well, they want to be able to freeze your bank account in order to destroy your life. And the way that they can do that is by having everything be centralized. And so a key part of chartalism is to make sure that they can control what people say and do, even just far beyond what we would typically expect. The worst, I think, situation in the world in terms of human rights abuses along these lines is the Communist Chinese Party, where they control society there through a social credit score and are able to incentivize their population in order to accomplish the goals of the Communist Party in that jurisdiction. And so that is the diametric opposite of the vision that our founding fathers had. And I think that it's also just opposed to humanism in general, and the right of people to have autonomy, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I think that as Thomas Jefferson put it so eloquently. Okay, so where do things stand today? Senator Warren has proposed this bill in the Senate. She's gotten a lot of other senators to sign on as sponsors. And I think that, the way she's gone about this is very shrewd and arguably very cynical, which is that she uses tragedies like the terrorist attack on Israel in order to advance her narrative, even when the facts don't support what she's saying. So, for example, her perspective was that the terrorist attack was funded by Bitcoin. That was a complete falsehood. It was actually funded by banks and traditional, credit cards, debit cards, checks, and not only that, it was also in large part funded by Iran, which has received billions of dollars from the traditional banking system. So the U.S. has had a policy of unfreezing funds in order to give billions of dollars to Iran, which indirectly end up in the coffers of Hamas and other terrorist organizations. So in any case, very cynical of her. And I think, though, that where we are now is that the House, which has a very thin Republican majority, is rejecting this bill as not solving a real problem because Senator Warren made up the problem. She invented the problem in order to avoid talking about her real reasons for banning Bitcoin. Right? She doesn't want to overtly say that her goals are communism, right, of having a monopoly. Rather, she wants to talk about how she's trying to stop criminals and terrorists, which is disingenuous and a lie. So on the House side, there is no kind of equivalent, and it looks like this bill will not move forward in the House, and it certainly hasn't come down to a vote in the Senate either. So it is still very concerning, given the number of different senators who are co-sponsoring this legislation. So it's very important for us to be engaged, whether it's through calling your senator and your representative, or having these conversations with their staff so that they're well informed and they understand that this legislation is not only misguided, it's unconstitutional and it's frankly un-American. So I think that I don't think that the bill will pass, to be clear, but we also do have to stand up and fight it. The analogy I use is, for example, if you had a professional sports team go play against an amateur team, the professional team still has to play. Even if they know they're going to win, they still have to play. They can't just sit on the sidelines, right? Or sit on their hands. If they do that, they will lose against the amateurs. And so it's really important for us to be engaged. Even if we think we're going to win, we still have to play the game and get out there on the field and put in our best. All right. Gabe, any reactions to that long monologue? Sorry, I rambled on there.
No, not much. Just that this is, concerning, and this is the first thing that I've heard about this. Obviously, you hold a lot of the knowledge here in this room, but I like learning, and I just never heard of this before. I mean, I understand that, there are organizations that need to be monitored, but to do that and then put everybody under the same, cloak of observation just doesn't seem right,
Yeah, and to be clear, I think that it is important for us to be, or for law enforcement to be going after terrorists and criminals. I mean, obviously, it affects us all. The question in my mind is, how do they go about doing it? And personally, I'm a fan of Sherlock Holmes. Of you gather clues, you investigate, and you do it in a framework that is respectful of people's civil liberties, right? If we just run roughshod over everything, that's how we end up having innocent people in jail, which is also an injustice. And furthermore, we also create more problems and opportunities for criminals to enact their mischievous plans if we're giving them all this data, for example. Now, let's say, hypothetically, if there was no Bank Secrecy Act, how would investigators go after financial crimes? Well, they would get probable cause, right? Probable cause is not a very high bar to clear. They just need a thread to pull on, to go to a judge, to get a warrant. to subpoena for the financial records, or to subpoena for a search warrant that, or to search the person's house and to seize their computer, to seize their even their Bitcoin wallets or their Bitcoin node or their Bitcoin mining rigs, right? The government can still do that. They just have to meet certain thresholds that prevent abuses of justice. And so it's really important that the founding fathers were very wise in creating these requirements, and they're not onerous. They can be met. They just require good investigative, Sherlock Holmes work of, hey, let's pull out our magnifying glass, let's find some fingerprints and get probable cause to be able to properly investigate, rather than having mass surveillance where all the banks are deputized and upload all their data to the Treasury Department, and then somebody at Treasury, can go browse your financial information, which is really backwards.
This is just for me, is reminiscent of post 9/11 and having everyone's phones tapped.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that that is a great analogy, and we have this kind of knee-jerk reaction when there is a terrorist attack or something bad happens, that we want to figure out, all right, how can we stop this from ever happening again? And I think that the danger there is overreacting. And we shouldn't underreact either. But in the case of the Bank Secrecy Act, it's not clear that it has actually prevented anything. It's very reactive. So then after something bad happens, then they go back and, oh, there's a suspicious activity report here that we missed. Because the other challenge they have is that they collect so much data. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. And the 9/11 hijackers, they paid for their flight training. They paid for box cutters. How are you going to find flight training and box cutters in billions of financial transactions? It's not realistic. And the proof is that, the Bank Secrecy Act was passed in 1970. 9/11 happened in 2001. 31 years after the BSA was passed, and the banks were not able to prevent that terrorist attack, and so clearly this law has failed. All right, so we wish Senator Warren bad luck on her legislation, and that she'll fail. And I hope that she finds a more constructive approach to engaging with this space. And I think, though, that something that she's missing is the benefits of Bitcoin. And so she sees it as all negatives. But I think even from her perspective of wanting to protect consumers from banks, that she should see the value of having an alternative that people can turn to, so that they don't have to rely on centralized financial institutions. And that even if Bitcoin's not perfect from her perspective, from mine it is perfect, but from her perspective it's not, that it is worth having, right, as an option, and that consumer choice matters as well. And so if consumers want to choose to use Bitcoin instead of using a bank, they should be able to do so. And I think that would be reasonable. All right. Next topic is something, at the state level here in Texas. The electricity grid is, among other regulators, is regulated by ERCOT for the reliability of the grid. And ERCOT has we've seen some headlines from years ago, Winter Storm Uri, that were critical of ERCOT. But if we actually dig into what happened with Winter Storm Uri, what we see is that there was a tremendous number of things that went wrong. And that ERCOT actually handled the situation pretty well, and that they prevented the grid from having a complete meltdown, which would have cut off electricity for months. And instead, they were able to implement rolling blackouts and eventually get the grid back up and running. So I actually think that was a success story. And their mandate is reliability. So they don't want to get into that situation again. And so ERCOT, the Public Utility Commission of Texas, and the Texas legislature have really had a very keen eye towards making the grid more resilient and robust, and they've made tremendous progress on that. And so this past summer, we had really exceptionally hot days and tremendous demand growth for electricity here in Texas. And despite that, the grid was very solid and did not have any kind of outages at the kind of grid level. So they should be commended for that. And their work continues. So they're continuously looking at ways of, okay, we've solved past problems, but how do we address future reliability concerns, and how do we prepare ourselves for the coming decades and how the grid is evolving? And the grid is evolving tremendously. So if we go and rewind back 50 years, the grid here in Texas was kind of very simple, right? On one hand, you had lots of coal-fired power plants, and then on the other hand, you had homes and businesses that were using electricity, and it was all rather predictable. And so ERCOT was able to manage that pretty well. And then we saw the development of natural gas, and that really took over a lot of the market share from the coal-fired power plants, but still pretty predictable. Then we saw the development with lots of help from subsidies of solar and wind, and that added an element of unpredictability because the sun, the sun is kind of predictable, although it's interesting once you start digging into the weeds. Solar is affected by cloud coverage, and cloud coverage is unpredictable. So you get occasional dips here and there. And then on the wind side, wind is really it can be, you can have lots of wind here in Texas, and we usually have a solid amount of wind, which is why it makes sense to develop wind generation. But you can also have days where there's just no wind. And then everything in between, where you have minute by minute fluctuations in terms of increases in local wind and decreases. And so that has really caused a lot of reliability concerns at the grid level. And so ERCOT is finding ways to strengthen the reliability of the grid by amplifying some of the requirements for generators. For example, to make sure that wind generators, weatherizing natural gas power plants, for example, right? So that if it does get really cold again, we won't have power plants going down because it's too cold. So that weatherization is really great. Now, lately, the focus has been on issues with regards to what's called voltage ride-through. So voltage ride-through is about, is a generator or a load able to stay on and continue to operate even if there's a voltage disturbance on the grid? Voltage disturbances can come from a lot of different places. Sometimes it's just that a tree fell down on a power line, and that causes a voltage disturbance. And the reliability risk is that if you have a voltage disturbance, and that causes a power plant or a load to trip off and to turn off, then that could have a cascading effect of decreasing the reliability of the grid, causing a frequency excursion, and necessitating kind of intervention from the grid operator to stabilize the grid. And so the ERCOT's focus has been on, okay, how do we increase the robustness of the grid so that we don't have issues around voltage ride-through? Now, typically, ERCOT is very focused on the power generation and transmission side. And the philosophy and arguably the legal requirement is about how can ERCOT deliver reliable electricity to loads? Meaning that loads are not responsible for reliable electricity. It is generators and transmission that are the ones that are responsible for delivering high quality, reliable power to loads. Now, recently, ERCOT has proposed some regulations that actually do cover loads, and both on voltage right through and on ramping of how quickly are you able to turn on your load and turn it off. And so those requirements are currently going through the stakeholder process at ERCOT of through the Large Flexible Load Task Force and other committees and within that framework. And frankly, they've been really controversial. They've been very contentious. I've been in the room on quite a few of these meetings, and the stakeholders just don't see eye to eye on a number of different points. And so it's something that, as a business, Riot has to keep a close eye on and to advocate for grid reliability and also for affordability and to make sure that the engineering decisions and the economic decisions are aligned with the reality on the ground. But it's also the case that there's lots of other stakeholders in this process. Bitcoin miners are not the only large load in Texas by any means. We have a thriving industry here in Texas that is drawn to the business-friendly environment and the grid and the low cost of electricity. And so getting all these different kinds of businesses aligned on understanding, the role they should play in terms of voltage ride-through or ramping, that's a challenge. And so, if we'll see that continue to develop. I'm sure I'll be bringing it back up again. So I just wanted to kind of put that on folks' radar. And it's interesting because it's a very in the weeds issue. But I think that it's important because when we think about Bitcoin mining, we don't mine Bitcoin in a vacuum. Riot in particular and other large Bitcoin miners in Texas, we're connected to the grid. We're providing valuable services to the grid, and we want to be good grid citizens. And so that involves being involved in the policymaking process so that we get outcomes that are the best for Texans. And that's really, it's important for us. All right. So I'll go on to, last but not least, a update from the company. We recently published on the December 6th our corporate presentation. So huge round of applause to our corporate development team. I hope to have Jason Chung or Gordon or both on the podcast soon, next time they're in Austin. And so they did a fantastic job putting together our slide deck that goes through kind of where the company's at today and where we're going in the future. And we'll add these slides, a link to these slides in the show notes, and then in the video we'll splice in some of the highlights. So first of all is that today Riot is really at the forefront of the Bitcoin mining industry. We've got a significant scale of operations. So we're an industrial scale operation with almost 100,000 Bitcoin mining rigs. And reflecting 10 exahash of capacity deployed, and significant production numbers with that, right? So over the past 9 months, ending in September 30th, here I'm reading the footnote, 5,000 Bitcoin mined, which is $202 million of revenue. Huge numbers. Now, the key part of Riot's corporate strategy is about being the lowest cost producer, right? And striving towards that. So direct cost to produce one Bitcoin of $5,500, meaning that when the Bitcoin price is at $40,000, subtract $5,500 from that, and that is kind of our marginal profit that we collect. Now, to get to our net profit, you still have to subtract, lots of other numbers, my salary included, Gabe's salary. So
5,600.
Yeah. Got to stay humble and stack sats. And that the other key part of it is it's not just about having the lowest cost and having the best income statement and cash flow. It's also about having the best balance sheet. This is a really important part of the strategy. We always hear about how volatile Bitcoin is. And the way to handle that volatility is really by holding more cash and more Bitcoin on your balance sheet so that you can weather that volatility. So that when there's a bear market, we can continue to invest when others are cutting back on their investments or leaving the industry entirely, even, right? So, we got zero long-term debt, and we did a fantastic job of building through the bear market. And so now, as we emerge from the bear market, we have our Rockdale facility that's firing on all cylinders. We repaired the dry coolers on Building G, and now we have the Corsicana facility that is rapidly developing that we'll go over shortly. So, the Rockdale facility has 700 megawatts of capacity. The Corsicana facility has 1 gigawatt of capacity when it is built out, and so that has already been approved through the interconnect process with ERCOT. And I also want to mention something that's really important is ESS Metron. ESS Metron is part of Riot that is a electrical equipment manufacturer based out of Denver, Colorado. And through that vertical integration of having the electrical equipment being manufactured in-house, we're able to develop our facilities with much more speed, lower cost, and predictability. Right? So we're controlling the supply chain in that regard. All right. So another great point here that is highlighted in the deck is about our purchasing of ASICs, of Bitcoin mining rigs from MicroBT. So not only have we purchased MicroBT machines for Corsicana for this first 400 megawatts, but we also recently announced that we are following through on some of the purchase options that we had as part of that deal. And so that gives us a tremendous amount of future hash rate. In fact, we have a vision and a path to having 100 exahash, which is 10 times more than where the company currently is, and would reflect at the current network difficulty 20% of the network. Now, let's be clear, the network difficulty is going to continue to increase. And so while today we might be at 500 exahash, I think that by the time we've developed 100 exahash, it certainly will be the case that the network will have grown. But we have a plan to continue to grow with the network and outpace the network, depending on what happens, with our competitors. So we'll see how that develops with the halving and with our rapid expansion. And it's not just in 2024 that we have clarity on where we want to be. It's also in 2025 where we're showing that with phase 2 of Corsicana, we'll be able to get to 38 exahash. Let's see. All right. So rather than going into the other topics that are in the corporate deck, because I think that those are things we've covered on the podcast before, but also things that I'd like to discuss with our in-house experts. And we're now coming up on an hour, right, of content. I'll skip ahead here and see. I think that something that's really cool is the new immersion tanks that we're using in Corsicana, and that those will allow us to. I think the biggest advantage here is increasing the life of the mining rigs. Right, if they are in a bath, taking a bath, they're going to be able to last a lot longer than if they are subject to kind of the heat of the air cooling. And so having Corsicana be all immersion, I think it's going to be a huge boost to the life of the MicroBT machines that we're putting in there. And that will be exciting to see it develop. I'll leave it here. Gabe, any questions before we close it out? Yeah,
I was on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it nowadays. And I just had to ask you, what's your big deal against golf, man?
Yeah, so great question. So we saw a news story come out about Bitcoin mining's water usage, and there was there's a pseudo intellectual, pseudo academic who goes by Dogeconomist, Alex DeVries, and he works for a central bank out in Europe. So he's a direct competitor to Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. Although it was interesting that he decided to not disclose any conflicts of interest, which I thought was dubious. And he put together this paper that was hand waving about how much water Bitcoin mining might use hypothetically in theory. And I found it to be rather nonsensical. And, it basically boiled down to, no pun intended, boiled down to evaporation of water. And I was doing some research of my own, and something that consumes a lot more water than Bitcoin mining is golf. And I decided to go on an anti-golf diatribe and started putting out some tweets criticizing golf for its water usage, and also criticizing it for all sorts of other problems it has with regards to kind of the social climate around golf. It's not a real sport, hitting a ball with a stick. I mean, come on, give me a break. But I actually love golf. I grew up golfing. I still golf. I'll continue to golf. The point I wanted to make is that you can take any kind of activity and you can look at all the negatives of that activity and then declare it bad, right? But in real life, what we have to do is we take the cons, the negatives of an activity, and then we look at the pros, right? What are the good things that we get from that activity? In the example of golf, I mean, we're social animals. We get to socialize. I think that's inherently valuable.
We get to reconnect to Mother Nature, and it's funny that it's all it's like fabricated nature when you're on a golf course.
It is, and I'd argue that maybe some people like real wilderness.
Sure,
right? They want to climb Mount Everest. They want to put their lives on the line. But golfing in a forest is really challenging. So
then I propose that we shift our focus from golf, and everybody should play disc golf, because those courses seem to be more, natural woodscapes and natural landscapes. You don't need perfect grass to putt a disc.
That's true. I'll go into a defense of golf now.
Uh-oh.
Golf speaks to a really deep need inside of humans, and I might get charged with sexism and canceled for this, but men in particular, of using a stick to hit a ball. And so the violence involved of the swing, the whack, and the really satisfactory ping, as we call it, of hitting a ball right on the club, face, and seeing it almost like, and in particular, I mean, you've got the drivers, right? But even kind of the irons that send it high up in the air, like a mortar. Like, hey, we're at war here, and the target is the
not
flag.
That body of water.
Yeah.
That
Well, yes. Now, where I end up is in the body of water.
Man, I can't tell you. I was so tempted to reply to that tweet with a picture of you at one of our golf
You should
scrambles.
have. Oh, that would have been great engagement. It's not too late. Quote tweet it.
Just giving fuel to the memers on Twitter.
Yeah, look at this hypocritical influencer. They say one thing on social media, but then you look at what they're doing in real life, and it's the opposite. And then the sand. The sand, it reminds me of D-Day. Okay, I'm going too far here. I'm really going to get canceled. But all this to say is that I like golf, but you can take anybody's hobby, anybody's activity, go through it with a fine-tuned comb. You can spin it into a negative of how much it's wasting, etc. And it was really to hit back on this approach to Bitcoin mining, where they only look at the negatives and they don't look at the positives. And the positives with Bitcoin mining are twofold. One, it's about having competitive issuance of the currency. It's the diametric opposite of the chartalism I was talking about earlier, where instead of having a monopoly, we have a competitive market where anybody can issue Bitcoin, and they do it through the permissionless mining process. And so that helps avoid any kind of excess profits from a monopoly, which is called seigniorage rents. And I see that as just a key part of monetary ethics, is that it should be the case that anybody can go and issue the currency or the money, whether it's by mining gold in their backyard or by mining Bitcoin, and that we should not have these anti-counterfeit laws, which really are violations of our free speech. If I want to print a $100 bill on my home printer, I should have a right to do that. Okay, I should have the right to free speech to do that, and I kind of see it as just encroaching on fundamental liberty there. The second advantage or value of Bitcoin mining is about having that decentralized clock in order to prevent double spending, so that we don't have to rely on a centralized clock like a bank that would order the transactions to favor them, right, to maximize their overdraft fees. And so that's the second part, is decentralizing the ordering of transactions so that we take out that politicized human element that would undermine our ability to transact freely. So yeah, golf is good. Golf is great. I do hope you post that picture, Gabe.
I got you.
That way we can continue the controversy. But it's funny. I had to stop tweeting anti-golf stuff because people, unfortunately, there's a bell curve, and some people thought I was talking about it seriously, and they thought that I'm anti-golf and that they can't be friends with me anymore because they're like former golf pros who like.
That's what I love about the Bitcoiners, and we talked about this in the last episode. Is like just the high level of memery and just the it's just funny what we can do on Twitter or X, whatever.
Yeah, we have a good time, and so I've just got to find an activity that's a little less controversial. Now that we talked about it, in the news articles that were publicizing this nonsense research, they talked about how many swimming pools of water Bitcoin miners are using. You know what's really a waste of water? Swimming pools.
Swimming pools, actual swimming pools.
Yeah. What are you doing swimming back and forth? There's lakes. There's oceans. You don't need a swimming pool.
Even rivers and creeks.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up swimming in a creek, so
yeah,
it's not that bad.
Building a swimming pool. Are you kidding me?
Ridiculous.
You got to dig up all that dirt. Wait, you think the excavator is running on unicorn farts? It's like the pollution involved in building a swimming pool and then keeping it filled with water, heating it. People are out there heating their swimming pools. It's outrageous. Hot tubs.
With you.
Only bad things happen in hot tubs.
Oh man. Well, that's good to hear that you're not actually opposed to the world playing golf.
No. Now I'm anti-pool. How many children die in pool accidents a year?
That's morbid.
Well, I mean, it goes to the point of, hey, if we only look at the negatives, we would make everything illegal, right?
It takes me back to the high school debate. I did cross-examination debate in high school, and it's literally, you can argue the pro or the neg on anything as long as you have the research to back it up and you seem like you believe in what you're talking about. Anything can be pros and negs, and you can go on, the death of each thing. We would tie everything to China's advancement and then nuclear warfare.
Nuclear war, yeah.
Exactly. Everything went back to war with China when it came to debate. And so I think if we keep playing golf and ruining our ecosystems, China's going to take advantage of us, and they're going to come, and we're going to be a communist outpost of the Chinese government.
Yeah, that's how every debate ends. Maybe I should just be anti-nuclear weapons. 'Cause then I won't get any pushback on that if people saying, "Hey, I enjoy nuclear weapons. Leave me alone."
Yeah, that'll go over really well.
Yeah, it's a waste of resources. But not a particularly original critique either.
No.
All right. Well, thanks all for joining. Looking forward to the holiday season, continuation of the holiday season. And we'll see you in the new year. So thank you for being loyal listeners. Hope you subscribe, share it, and I'll see you next year.